Hello and welcome to Failure and Analysis. My name is Kevin Jordan, and I'll be talking about or reacting to the video for the Q&A for patch 8.2 that was just released last night, or streamed last night. So let's take a listen.
Another World of Warcraft live developer Q&A. My name is Josh Allen, aka Community Manager Lore, here once again with Game Director Ian Hazakostas. Ian, thank you so much for coming on once again.
Hey Josh, happy 2019.
Happy 2019.
Another year, another Q&A.
Yes, exactly. One per year. That's what we're
Exactly.
Up to. I'm just kidding. So we actually have a ton of questions. I'm really excited to get to the answers of here.
Yeah, all the hard-hitting questions. We're gonna get pet battles in. We're gonna get clipping issues on helms.
Druid transmog.
Exactly.
Okay.
No, yeah. In all seriousness, I think we pretty much have a hit list of the most upvoted questions and all the hot topics that people want to hear about. Sorry.
Because that wasn't true at all in the last Q&A. So let's see how they actually do in this department. The last Q&A I watched, I felt this is an opportunity they have to address the major concerns people have. Get people back on board. Talk to the people that are the most upset and send exactly the message they want to send, right? And last time they squandered that opportunity with taking a bunch of softball questions that very few people are really upset about. Yeah, there's a couple things that people want to know about, but the difference between that and like the stuff people are consistently talking about that they're really upset with, this is their opportunity every month that they do these to hit those and address those. So let's see. I mean, they make a joke about it that they're gonna just do softball questions, right? And then he says flat out, no, we're going to hit all the hard-hitting and upvoted questions. So let's see if they live up to it. I hope they do.
This is what I deal with. Okay, let's just go into this first question.
It's so hard not to troll. I'm sorry.
It is. It really is. Let's go to this first question.
Speaking of trolls.
From Mamea. Yeah, that's actually...
Hey. Yeah, try harder not to troll. People are pissed, right? So, again, that's that professionalism, right? Like, you have to, I can see blowing off steam in the office, saying things like that amongst the team, right? But, yeah, again, this is an opportunity to convince people, to win people over, to win people back, right? Don't squander it.
Actually, a good transition. Asking any specifics for the release time frame of Coherence and Zandalari.
So, yes, the day that patch 8.15 comes out. So, as people have seen on the 8.15 PTR right now, the allied races are available there. Their acquisition quest lines are testable. The requirements for accessing the Coherence and Zandalari are finishing the war campaign through the Tides of Vengeance step, which gives you the achievement. That's before going into the raid. It's earnable right now as of the start of the new season and the opening of Battle of Dazar'alor. It's exalted rep with either Tiragarde or Zuldazar, and just having done your continent quest line. You can accomplish all of those things today. The second 8.15 drops, you'll log in and have the quest waiting for you to go get your allied race unlocked. Now, why not sooner? Two reasons. One, part of it is a reflection of the story, and the plot of Battle for Azeroth thus far has been about not just meeting and befriending these allied races, but truly getting them to a point where there's a close enough bond that they're willing to join the alliance, to join the horde, to take part in this larger war that spans the globe, and that comes after some key events like what we're seeing in Battle of Dazar'alor right now that really forge that bond. That's the story reason. The practical reason. Now, so folks may remember back at BlizzCon, about a year and a few months ago, when we announced allied races for the first time, we announced Zandalari and Dark Iron Dwarves. The actual original intent was to have Zandalari and Dark Iron as the two allied races at launch in Battle for Azeroth. Notably missing from that is Coherence. That's because we didn't actually know or think that we were going to be able to do Coherence practically. Making a new race is one of the most time-consuming things we can do from an artistic perspective. It actually takes up like a gigantic portion of the entire manpower that we have available for making an expansion. And with the Allied races, we wanted to make a bunch of new races rather than just a single one. And yes, people have noticed that most of them are variants on existing races. We get custom animations for them, change some of their anims, change aspects of them, but we're not making it from scratch, which is part of what enables us to actually get the wide range that we have done. Coherence are an exception. The Coherence is actually a completely new model, completely new skeleton, new rig in animating terms. And it's actually every bit as costly from an art perspective as, let's say, the Pandaren was back in Mists of Pandaria. So when we looked at that, we didn't think we were going to be able to do it. We thought, because it's actually literally more time-consuming than all the other Allied races combined in terms of our art resources.
And you didn't know this when you announced it at BlizzCon because didn't have that discussion? Yeah, that's a discussion that really doesn't take that long. Like, if you were to ask an animator on the team, how hard would it be to do this, right? Well, has any sense, right, of what his job is, and they all did back in my day. And the animations, I think, are still pretty good. So they would be able to tell you instantly whether or not this is a very time-consuming thing, or if it's just a reskin and a couple touch-ups of an existing rig, right? So yeah, have that conversation before you make announcements. Also, this is softball question number one, right? Like, who is this question serving? People that are having a good time in the game and they want to know what's next. What's coming down the pipe that I can get excited about for the next big thing. I'm really enjoying playing right now and I'm excited about the future, right? The people that it's not serving are the people that are upset with the current content. They don't care about the next layer of content that's going to feel like and play like what's going on right now. So, you can answer questions all day for people that are enjoying the game currently, but that's, again, hiding your head in the sand and pretending like there's nothing wrong with WoW. And there aren't a lot of people that are really upset. So they're squandering an opportunity when they do that. And it's also just taken too long. It's like, yeah, that stuff will be ready when it's ready. Right? Like, you can talk all day about the logistics of, design. But is this really a question that's like on fire on Reddit to the point where they have to get really detailed on why it takes a little longer to deliver? I can't imagine. I mean, people are curious when they're going to get to play their Allied races, but it's not like the lack of the Allied race is causing WoW to be on fire, right? So, just a strange question to hit, and an easy one.
Wow.
And so we were proceeding with, well, it would be really nice to have Coherence in here, but we don't think we can do this. And so that was the plan we had in mind at BlizzCon. As development of Battle for Azeroth went on, we felt increasingly bad about that because it felt like really it's what the story deserved. The whole story was about befriending the Zandalari, befriending the Coherence. Why not have both? We realized that if we stretched, we could get the Coherence done, but that it wasn't going to be able to happen until 8.15. And once we knew we were going to do that, it really made sense to pair the Coherence and the Zandalari. So basically, Horde players who are waiting on Zandalari trolls, you can blame the Alliance. And blame us, because that's really how all this works. But that's the full backstory. That's why we were always hesitant to ever announce something, let alone at BlizzCon, and then walk it back or delay it in any way. But we wanted to do right by both factions, and once we knew we were going to have Coherence in their full glory, we wanted to be able to pair that with Zandalari, because that's really what fits the story and what makes sense there.
Okay, cool. And then, Magcar was always the plan to happen at some point also. It just kind of was flipping them around.
Exactly.
Right?
The original...
Just as a follow-up comment for Lore here, it's looking a little better. He dropped the hoodie down. He's wearing the sparkly hat, which again is cool. I mean, it's nerd cred, right? He's looking a little better, right? Like, it's still the hoodie, but that's okay. At least it's zipped. It's not hanging loose off him, So it's an improvement. I will give him that.
Plan had been Magcar in 8.15, and so we just pulled those back and made them available right at the start. Zandalari and 815 instead.
Okay, perfect. One other thing that you mentioned that I just do want to hammer home, because I've seen a ton of questions about it, is that you don't have to do the raid to unlock these allied races. We've used phrases like it requires the Battle of Dazar'alor to be open in the past, which is that's because everything was sort of timed to become available.
Yeah, it's basically it's the 4th chapter of the Tides of Vengeance war campaign, which is like what sends you into like what's basically the preparations immediately preceding the raid.
Right.
That's when the achievement fires. That's all you need to do.
Yep. Cool. All right, moving on. Next question comes from Colin the Tank, who says, can you explain the rationale behind Alliance getting the opportunity for eye level 400 gear this week, and likely every week, for engaging in world...
Okay, this is a good one. This is a good question. This is something that people are upset about. It's touching on welfare gear, right, which seems to be coming up over and over and over again in WoW's sort of environment. Gear that is very high item level and is not earned, right? So, yeah, this is a good one. Get the popcorn.
PvP.
So a couple things. First off, we actually genuinely don't think this is going to be every week. I think we've seen a lot of increasing participation from the Alliance and narrowing the gap in participation in War Mode since Tides of Vengeance launched. And the quest is only going to be offered when there is a significant disparity. So the goal is for this to eventually stop being offered. That said, a couple of pieces. So why does this exist in the first place? Well, we added the increased bonus rewards for Alliance, or for the outnumbered faction, going up to 30%, to get more of the outnumbered faction to opt into War Mode. But we also realized that to some extent we needed to get Horde, some players, to consider turning off War Mode. Now, that sounds maybe jarring up front, but what we saw in terms of our data was right when Battle for Azeroth launched, the ratio between Alliance and Horde was actually pretty close to even. It wasn't dead even, but it was actually close and competitive. There were some challenges with the way our shard matchmaking was working that led to Horde outnumbering Alliance in a lot of situations early on. But by the time we fixed those, we'd seen two trends emerging. Alliance, who felt outnumbered, were turning off War Mode increasingly, but more and more Horde were turning it on, because now these weren't people who opted into War Mode on day one, but once word got out that, hey, there's just a free 10% rewards waiting for you, just turn this on. You had tons of folks who really weren't interested in World PvP at all, and actually maybe very averse to World PvP, who were just in the habit of having War Mode on because, well, why not? It's 10% free rewards. By incentivizing Alliance not just to go do their world quests in War Mode, but to actually hunt the more numerous faction, that actually helps get the balance to a better place on both sides. The goal here is to create a mode that offers fun and engaging World PvP for those who are interested in it, while compensating folks for the inefficiency that comes with getting into World PvP while you're trying to get your world quests done or go to a dungeon or whatnot.
Yeah, like the point of the increased rewards isn't just for having checked a box in an interface thing. It's because you're going to have the inefficiencies from having World PvP involved. When we have an environment where there's no World PvP, but you're getting the increased rewards anyway, that's kind of a problem.
Exactly.
So, yeah, they're not seeing the bigger picture here. The bigger picture is you can't solve this problem with handouts, right? I'll use handouts in the scope of like welfare, right? Like, as people like to use, you just can't. You can't fix this thing with. It's too jarring. It's too jarring to the entire scope of the game, in terms of gear that isn't earned, in terms of social fabrics being completely torn apart when massive groups of players go from one place to another, because of these rewards, right? Like, this is a deeper, bigger problem that they need to sit down and actually hash out. But they seem to be in this mode where, and this happened again with the anniversary event, like, let's just give them more XP, a faster XP rate. Let's give them free purples. Like, they seem to be in this mode where it's just like, yeah, here's free junk, that makes you level faster, that makes your character more powerful, that is super artificial, and not only like decreases the integrity of the world, and everything going on within that world, but doesn't actually fix the problem. So they're causing damage and they're not getting anything out of it. And the community's telling them this, right? Like, it's pretty crazy when you offer people free stuff and the majority of the backlash is still negative, right? Because that's not how we're wired, right? Like, we're wired to just love free stuff. So when a lot of your community is telling you stop giving out free stuff, you realize how big a problem that is for the community. And so it should be obvious, right? This is not the solution, and they should stop using that as a means to placate or hotfix or, paper over deeper fundamental problems within the game's, systems and structures. But it doesn't seem to have, hit them yet.
Now, we do think that eye level 400 may actually be a bit too high. So when we first introduced this quest in Tides of Vengeance, it gave heroic grade quality gear, which at the time was eye level 370 heroic Uldir level gear. That made sense 3 months into Uldir, when there was a certain level of overall gear in the player base as a whole at max level, and that really was what was required for it to be exciting as an incentive at all. Now, that's very different, I think, at the start of a new raid tier. And when most people haven't set foot in Heroic Battle of Dazar'alor yet, let alone really killed more than the first few bosses, getting an eye level 400 piece just from this quest is probably over-rewarding and actually risks undermining other core activities, not just raiding, but also Mythic Plus, also rated PvP.
There you go.
So, obviously, we're not going to change anything out from under players this week, but what we're thinking is that next week, if a faction is outnumbered significantly, this quest will give a 385 piece, but we're probably going to add something else to the pot, like some conquest points, to incentivize, the core PvP gameplay there, to get it to a place where it still hopefully feels rewarding, but isn't overwhelming rewards from other sources.
Okay.
And the solution they're shooting for here, right? Like, sorry I talk over the video. I need to pause it before I talk because I've got the video up really loud so you guys can hear it. But their goal here, it seems like they're super happy when people switch, right? Like, they seem super happy that, an entire guild switched over to Alliance and now the factions are balanced, right? As if that metric is the only one that matters in the game. And that's really dangerous. So they need to step back from that, that thing. Like, and that's a typical problem I see nowadays with some of the decisions, is that they don't see the bigger picture. They don't see how everything is connected to everything else. They see a specific problem and they put a specific band-aid on it to address that. And they don't understand how that particular band-aid is going to cause problems over here and over here and over here. And that's going to need 3 more band-aids, which are all going to have another ripple effect on everything else that's connected to those things. And so it's very narrow-minded, very, tunnel vision. And so, if all you care about is Horde equal Alliance, in terms of player counts, then you're going to do all kinds of short fixes that actually just lead to bigger problems down the road. So, there seems to be a problem with big picture thinking all the way through, a fundamental understanding of how everything is connected to everything else. So, pretty unfortunate.
We actually have a similar question about war mode. I'm just going to move right on to it. It comes from Abruek, who says, seeing as the war mode bonus has been an unwavering 30% for the Alliance, does the team consider this to be a failure at balancing? So you were saying just a second ago that we're actually starting to see some of the benefits from the war mode bonus coming in.
Yes, it wouldn't surprise me. Basically the answer to this is a lot of what I said in response to the last question. It wouldn't surprise me if we actually see that buff tick down to 25% in coming weeks in some regions, maybe even as soon as next week. The way it works, essentially, it's a sliding scale where if things are roughly balanced, it's going to be 10% for both sides, up in increments of 5% to a maximum of 30% if the imbalance is severe. Since Tides of Vengeance, we've actually seen this system be very effective at increasing participation in war mode from the outnumbered faction and really just narrowing the gap. It's honestly, the gap is half of what it was when Tides of Vengeance came out. And I think players who participate in war mode, I think, can probably universally attest. If you were Horde especially, you probably didn't see a whole lot of Alliance when you were out questing. That has not been the case lately, and we view that as a success. So I think with regard to the specific question, I think we do view it as a failure from a few months ago, and I think this is fixing that mistake and getting things back on track to a place where there is activity, there is actual PvP happening in our PvP mode.
So it's a resounding success. And, no collateral damage at all. Yeah. Everyone's just happy. We're just happy that, suddenly a bunch of people switched and got free gear and ripped apart our community. And but those numbers are starting to look, pretty good. Yeah, 25%. Hey, that's pretty good. As much as 25% instead of 30. So success, right? Like, to me, that's like a marginal gain, right? Like, that's not even close to the 10% on both sides, right? From my experience with building systems like that, that's like you've scratched the surface at maximum discrepancy, which is just a nightmare, right? To just under the nightmare state, which could be, who knows, right? But yeah, it's just under the nightmare state, and they're calling it a resounding success, despite the collateral damage, right? No, I'm going to say it's not a resounding success. Back to work.
Cool. Moving on. Next question from Dradeka, I think is how I'll pronounce that, who says, I've greatly enjoyed the 30% bonus as Alliance for War Mode and almost never take it off. There's a lot of excitement when battles organically occur. However, the server lag is almost unbearable. Is anything being done about server stability? So obviously we've been...
Yeah, another good one. Another good one. This is obviously like... Yeah, even when PvP does happen, right? It's it's being shut down for technical reasons, right? In some cases. Yeah, the question itself is like, yes, we're doing something about server stability, right? I'm curious to see if he gives any specifics, but it's like, of course they're looking at how can it not be a train wreck, right? So we'll see, but we'll see.
On our end, we've been talking a lot about server stability over the last couple of weeks, last couple of months now, I guess, basically since launch. What's going on there? I know we've done some stuff.
Don't care, Lore. Don't care that you've been talking about it. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt here and assume that you've been talking to server programmers, right, about the issue in depth. But I actually doubt that's actually the case, right? Because they don't want to spend their time, right? Like when the servers are on fire because of this ability, this problem that's been building, they don't want to take their time. They want solutions and they want to talk to other professional coders that are trying to solve these problems, right? That's what they want to spend their time doing, not talking to Lore, about what he's going to write up on the forums, because it's not fixed. It's not like they have fixes ready to deploy. So they have a lot of work to do, right? And they got to talk it over with other people that are like-minded and are going to be able to, solve this problem. And it's a complex one, like I have no idea what it takes to fix these problems, right? So this is way above me. But I'm sure it's a pretty big problem. And yeah, they want to talk to other people that know how to solve it, get this thing hammered out, not talk to Lore. So again, we don't care how you've been talking about it, Lore. Just Lore, focus on focus on transmitting information from developers to the community, right?
Stuff already, but
This is a top priority for our server team and our engineering team as a whole. We understand that nothing else in the game really matters if the game physically feels like it's not performance, like you're playing, you're just kind of stuck in mud when you're trying to get spells off or interact with the world around you, let alone fight the other faction. So it's a top priority. Unfortunately, with things like this, with performance improvements, it's rarely a single silver bullet or a single giant problem we just need to find and solve. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And so there's been ongoing work, particularly since Tides of Vengeance came out, doing diagnostics, getting logs from servers, analyzing reports. We've found and fixed several issues. We're continuing to find more. Specific reports there are super helpful. We go through the forums and see, hey, this person on this realm, this character name reported lag at 9:30 Central Time in this zone, and we can actually look into the logs to see what was happening and hope maybe dig deeper to put in more hooks so we can identify the problems.
Okay, first of all, super happy that they've made their top priority, right? Like that's good to hear, right? That's heartwarming. That's really nice for the community to hear that this is the thing that they care about the most. Second of all, the implications of what he's saying,
it's an ongoing process,
is how important and invaluable the community's role in this is. Like, you need to send reports that I have lag or else our hands are tied. That's so ridiculous, right? So, clearly the servers can gain their own logs. They can figure out when there's lag and they can start logging, and then people can look at those logs and figure out what happened, right? It should not require somebody clicks those UI things and says, yeah, I've got lag, right? So pretty bad. That makes them sound pretty amateur, right?
We're definitely not done. We understand, MMO is massively multiplayer, and
right.
Massive is important there, and there's nothing more fun and epic than some of those huge battles. And the challenge is always what in engineering terms is an n squared problem, where if you have 20 people fighting 20 people, 20 times 20 is 400. That's sort of the overall number of events that are happening. 30 times 30, just going up by 10, is now 900, and then 1600 for 40.
Oh wow. Does anyone get the feeling that it's gotten worse since, because we've all seen those videos of massive world boss with PvP action going on, right? So they're coming across as like, yeah, massive. You guys need to remember this is a massively multiplayer game, right? Massively multiplayer games are hard to make. You guys need to remember that. I want to stress massive. And so, yeah, like, but when I hear that, I'm like, okay, well, you've had 15 years of experience, right? And the product seems worse for a lot of people. So shouldn't you know more about this stuff? What have you done in the meantime that's made this so much worse? Have you lost knowledge? Are you too ambitious in some of the things that you've put in, and didn't really calculate the cost correctly to what they were going to do? Is there too much data that has to be passed back and forth when V40 get together? So those are my sort of layman's expectations, and I'm not a layman, but it's like, when he talks about this stuff and that comment about, remember kids, it's a massive, right? Like, you try to do this. It's like, well, you have been doing it for 15 years. So, I don't know. Maybe put some of those lessons to use.
40 versus 40 and so forth. So it scales very rapidly in ways that can tax our servers, but improving that is literally the top priority. And I think we're actually we'd like to get in the near future some sort of blog out from an engineering perspective, like a dev water cooler, explaining some of the problems we've already found and fixed and the work that remains to be done, just to give some insight that I can't really provide as a non-engineer myself. But 100% agree, this is something that is of utmost important to us.
Oh, and maybe we can crowdsource the fixes too. That'd be nice. Just kind of put it out there on the water cooler. This is the stuff we can't figure out. Anyone? Bueller? Bueller?
Okay, cool. And like Ian said,
Cool.
Specificity in these reports when we get it is super, super helpful.
So you guys are all getting extremely drunk, right? Because there's two triggers. There's that said, and there's okay, cool, right? There's got to be okay, cool from lore as the other drinking game hit.
Things like where you were at the time, what were you doing, what's your character name, and so on. So that way, what time it was specifically. That way, our engineers can then look at the logs and say, okay, actually, we found the thing that happened that made our servers go crazy. Now we can actually track that down and fix it.
Because a lot of the time, if it were a truly universal problem where everyone was experiencing it all the time, it would be much easier to track down in a lot of ways. But someone can have all of their logging in place. They can be running a debug client and log into the game, and actually things just perform fine. You can play for a couple of hours. I mean, I log in every night and often don't run into any issues. Then other times I find myself doing a world quest and I'm seeing significant server lag and responsiveness delays on my spells. And it's just the question of tracking down what the underlying cause is.
Okay. Moving on. Next question comes from the Shoe Boots on Twitter, who asked, with Cool Tyrans, Zandalari, and possibly more allied races coming to Azeroth, would you consider just letting us have all our character slots on a single realm? So the maximum, I think it's fairly well known at this point, the maximum number of characters that you can have total.
Character slots. These are the burning questions.
Is 50, but currently the maximum you can have on a single realm is 18.
Yeah, exactly. It was, I think, 12, one per class before allied races were introduced. We've been increasing it with each allied race that's come out. I think this is a good point and a good question. And
I think this is a good question. This is nice and soft, and it's ball-shaped, and yeah, I can spend at least 15 minutes on this one. And yeah, I'll be out of here that much quicker.
And thinking about it just in response to this, I agree that makes sense. I'll talk to our team, but we probably should be able to just raise the cap all the way to 50 in 8.15 going forward with the new allied races. So if you have 50 characters in your account, sure, you can have them all on the same server. It doesn't seem like it should hurt anything.
Well, I think we can shut her down. Let's wrap it up. Reddit, you're no longer needed. 50 slots. Everybody, rise up. I mean, sit down. We don't need to rise up. Sit down. The rise up is canceled. 50 slots, everyone. 50 character slots. You guys want more? What, you don't have less than 50 characters?
Well, there you go. Next question coming from BB Mezzi on Twitter, who says, can we get a way to transfer war resources from our main to our alts like we had in Legion?
Yeah, this also seems like it makes sense.
I don't know.
That's something we probably can add just in 8.15. I think spend some more resources, get an account-bound pack of resources, probably with a little bit of a inefficiency there that you can mail off to alts. Totally understand that if you have an alt that you primarily use for a specific activity, you're not necessarily doing as many world quests or emissaries on that character. You still want to engage the mission table. You're doing that stuff on your main and have.
You know what I want? I want to be able to switch those war resources to my character that's on the other faction now because I switched and my whole guild switched. So can I have that as well? Can I, please? Come on.
Fair. Why not? That's something we can do.
Wow, back to back. Doing pretty well. All right.
Back to back. You heard it. It's all positivity round here. Yeah. We're cooking with gas now.
Right. Here we go, Ian. Here's a question from Acris who says, Can we get a Valor Point-like system which we can use to upgrade gear? Understand the argument for Titan Forge, but I've now went 7 weeks with no upgrade, as unless it Titan Forges, it's useless for the whole raid, not just myself. Really demoralizing system.
All right. Okay, this is a big one. They even, yeah, this one's about Titan Forging. Yeah, you guys ready? You guys have all seen this already. It's just me that's new, but I'm excited. I'm excited.
So,
sadly, not 3 in a row. Sorry, Josh.
Damn.
Okay, so a few pieces to this. So I would assume, so this question I assume was asked, at the end of the first raid tier, at the end of Uldir, at the end of the first season.
I think it came in right at the end of season 1.
I'm sure there's upgrades everywhere now. And to some extent, that's part of the natural cycle. It's always been the case. Before Titan Forging existed, even when Valor Points were present as an upgrade currency in Mist of Pandaria, when you're when you're in month 5 of a 5-month raid tier, you probably don't need a whole lot in the way of upgrades. And the way that used to work was just you go into a raid and boss 4 drops pants for me, and if I get my leggings, then I get my upgrade. We kill boss 4, he doesn't have my item. I'm getting nothing for the rest of the raid. That in and of itself could be demoralizing as well, especially when you're actually re-clearing to still progress on a later boss. And so Titan Forging, to some extent, was an answer to that problem, where there is the hope of continued power progression. You do have things to look forward to, some reason to be excited when you kill a boss and see what's on the corpse. Same, the chance for bonus sockets or tertiary stats like avoidance. Now, the problem with Valor Points that we had when we had the system in place for the first time in Mists, that I think would still remain, even if you used it as a way of manually Warforging or Titan Forging your gear, is that it makes transitioning from one raid tier to the next awkward in a few ways. Because people raise the concern of the amount of inflation that we already have and the size of the jumps in item level from tier to tier. If, let's say, a normal mode raider would use Valor Points to Warforge or Titan Forge all of their gear over the course of multi-month tier, you'd effectively be going into the next tier geared at a level higher across the board, higher than the content that you're doing.
Right.
And that's different than random Titan Forges and Warforges. And I think Titan Forging is actually relatively uncommon compared to Legion. If the large Titan Forges, the people that make the rounds on Reddit of hey, I got a 395 piece from LFR that was plus 60 level Titan Forged kind of thing. If you have 1 or 2 pieces you got lucky on and you don't replace those pieces in the next tier, okay, that's fine to some extent. Early on, especially, you got lucky. The rest of the tier offers you upgrades. But if you're this is a very typical type of raider or raid group that does normal mode, progresses through normal mode meaningfully over the course of 2-3 months, then begins heroic, gets partway through heroic by the end of the tier, and then new raid comes out, they go into normal again. If that group has Valor Point upgraded gear from the prior tier, 2 options. 1, we have much larger jumps where we have a 45 eye level jump instead of 30 from tier to tier, so that new content gives you rewards, because I think going in and killing a new boss for the first time, that group is a normal mode raid group that did some heroic at the end, but they're going to go into normal Battle of Dazar lore and struggle to learn those fights. Those are going to be meaningful progression for them. If you go through meaningful progression, kill a boss, and don't get an item that's an upgrade, that feels pretty bad. Alternately, so we'd have to either have large jumps, or we accept what we did at times in Mists, where you'd get an item, and then just keep it in your bags for a while until you could Valor Point upgrade it enough to replace the current gear that you're wearing. That also feels bad.
Okay, so here's the problem you have. Here's the problem you have right now. Valor Point system was garbage, right? And your community is begging you to turn it back to the garbage system because Titan Forging is worse, right? Both systems, right? Neither one of those is right. So they're both garbage, but unfortunately, and the other thing is, he even says, well, no, Titan Forging was made to address the problems with Valor Points. So again, a band-aid for a specific part of the execution or how you play the Valor Point system game, the play patterns involved in how you get into certain situations and things feel awkward. And so, but we found this one little issue, and we threw a Band-Aid on that, and that Band-Aid was Titan forging, which is like, again, the worst mechanic I have ever seen in an MMO. And by far the worst thing I've ever seen in WoW. Oh, yeah. So it's like, how about not, work from a garbage system standpoint and see how you can build that up to, something. And just rebuild, right? Try to get back to the honesty and integrity of certain color gear for certain types of content. And if you get all the gear for a particular raid tier, then when you go to the next raid tier, you have to get all the gear again, right? And not have a system that randomly kills that portion of the game for you, right? Oh, I got lucky, I got plus 60 piece, and now I won't need to upgrade this slot for 2 more raid tiers. Why is that an acceptable thing, right? Why is that super sweet? People like, right? You like collecting gear from raids. You want that kind of background incentive. You already have the incentives of, I'm playing with this cool group of players that I really like, and we like to do the new content, and we charge through it and have a blast, and we're also, upgrading our gear. And it's like, but you find out, before you even start, that a bunch of your slots don't even need to be upgraded because you lucked out in the last sec. It's like, the whole system seems flawed. But here you're in a situation where your community, again, is begging you to go back to another trash system.
Right.
So, long story short, that's part of the history. This isn't something that's off the table. I could actually see us doing something like this again, but I think it would make sense for the last tier of an expansion, where you have that somewhat longer tail. You're kind of rounding out your goals for the expansion, chasing perfection and completing your character, but we don't really have to worry in the same way about, okay, how do you replace this all next raid? When you're going into a whole new expansion after that, that's a very different story. We know that's a much fuller reset, and that can be managed differently.
So I agree there. I agree with that. Again, I've said this a few times on channel, is that the situation they're in now is a very tricky one to fix. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take, steps back towards, right? Like, they can't, it's difficult to experiment mid expansion with a whole new way of doing progression gear, right? So, but they need to start talking about it now, and it sounds like they are, but they really need to start designing how are we going to get ourselves out of this corner that these systems that we've put in have, put us in, and not just be like, well, what's the new thing we want to try? I don't know, fire it out, and if it doesn't work, well, we only have to live with it for 2 years, so it's fine. So I would, what's the word? What are the words I'm searching for? I would advocate some patience in your expectations about how long the process might be. Let's say starting from now, they started to do everything right, whatever that means. But they were totally capable and aware, and everything was going to be, wonderful in the next expansion, or the next 2 or the next 3, right? Like that. Yeah, you would need some patience to actually realize that, and none of those things are guaranteed, obviously. But I do agree with the fact that he shouldn't just play it out, right? But you can start talking to the community about it now. You can start talking about, these are the problems that we've identified. Here are the things that we've heard from you, and we appreciate the value of as big issues, right? As things we need to address, right? We need to eliminate these cons and we need to build up these pros, that kind of thing. Start talking to the community now and get them swinging back to your side. Get them hopeful again, right?
Okay. I do want to, just something that has been popping in my mind as we've been going through this question. I do think it's interesting, the example of going 7 weeks without an upgrade, feeling really demoralizing, just from my rose-tinted Burning Crusade Classic Raider glasses. I'm looking at this and going, yeah, I remember farming Black Temple for a year plus for no upgrades. That was good because.
Is he a classic boy underneath there? Is Lore is he secretly a classic boy under all that hat? I mean, you have to wonder, right? He's a GTA boy. You have to wonder, how many people are also pretty upset with the current state of WoW, that have played it for 10 plus years, like so many have. But they toe the line, But yeah, I'm interested.
Because we needed glaives. Anyway, let's move on to the next question. Comes from Shupu F413.
Which is funny because, he says he farmed for a year to get Illidan blades, right? Which is how every piece of gear works now in WoW because of the Titan forging rarities, right? Now everybody's farming constantly for that low chance to get the big nugget out of the slot machine.
On Twitter, and this actually ties into what you were just talking about. Yeah. So, what's the reasoning behind the huge jump in power level between tiers? Wouldn't 370 normal, 385 heroic, and 400 mythic make more sense than the absurdity now?
Thank you for the absurdity portion of that.
You were actually just talking a lot about something very closely related.
It's I think it's almost exactly the situation I just described. A group. So we've used 30 eye level jumps all through Legion for quite some time now because that was the smallest number that still guaranteed upgrades. We want to minimize inflation. We don't want to just gratuitously throw tons of item levels out there for two reasons. One, introduces some scaling problems as ratings and things get really out of whack late in an expansion. Also, it does risk invalidating and undermining your accomplishments in the short term if you feel like everything is just going to completely get blown away.
Does this seem disingenuous to anyone? We don't want to just throw item levels at people unless they switch factions or, I don't know, open a chest every week that you have no part in actually earning. Does this seem, a little strange? He wants to talk about the integrity of item levels and reward structures and the sense of earning a thing. That's a stretch.
In a couple months when the new season comes out, when the new raid tier opens. So we want to keep it as low as possible, but not so low that there aren't upgrades. And so, so the folks that did normal Uldir and progressed into heroic Uldir, they had a fair number of 370s that they're wearing. If they started in Battle of Dazar Lore and you worked to get a new boss down and it dropped a 370 side grade for you,
right,
that would feel pretty bad. And so it's just kind of been a principle we followed really all the way back to Wrath of the Lich King. When you go into a new raid that is at your target difficulty, you should kill a boss for the first time, look at the things on its loot table, and feel excited and look at those as upgrades. If you don't, that's a problem.
Yeah, that's a problem. You're absolutely right, Ian. And so why does Titan Forging exist? Why can you get all kinds of stuff from all over the game that blows away the next tier or blows away the current tier that you're working on? It's crazy.
And so that's what led us to this.
Okay. Let's move on. A question comes from Felrin, who says, can PvP please get some sort of vendor? It feels like we're forced to PvE in order to PvP due to how important stats are again and how bad PvP drops are. So this has been a super popular question. PvP vendors, what are our thoughts there?
PvP vendors. So we're talking about accumulating points in PvP and then having a vendor where I can buy stuff.
Okay, so the reason why we have some of the problems with vendors, I think, are there's a certain level of obscurity. You PvP, you get this currency, you get these points, you get these badges, whatever they are, and there's a place you have to go in the world to spend them. It's not clear for someone who's looking to get into PvP exactly what these are meant for, what you're supposed to do with them, and in practice, the way that system unfolded in the past was there was generally an order that you'd purchase your gear in. And we had things like rating requirements and total conquest requirements earned for the season to stop people from just buying their weapon first, because otherwise that would be the obvious right answer, and everyone would be running around like a glass cannon with a great weapon and weak armor and so forth. But we understand the value of the vendor is a feeling of control, a feeling that you can determine the path that you're going to gear your character in and what you're going to seek out when. The system that we're pursuing is recreating and trying to deliver all of those upsides, really, through a system that's a bit more transparent and just offers the rewards up front in the UI. There's some significant improvements we feel like we've made in Season 2 compared to the first season. I think major complaints that we heard with the way the conquest schedule worked were, one, that there wasn't sufficient choice of Azerite pieces. Now when you unlock an Azerite quest,
by the way, he just did what I was suggesting they start doing about progression gear later on. These are the things we've talked about. These are the pros that we embrace. These are the cons we're trying to eliminate. So good on him that he spoke specifically about internal discussions about the direction they're trying to go with things. That gets people excited, right? That gets people on board one way or the other, like, oh, well, those are the cons I like, or sorry, those are the pros I like, and those are the cons I hate. Okay, I'm on board. I'm excited to see what they come up with. Of course, you have to actually have a system that does those things and doesn't have all kinds of other collateral damage, right? But that's exactly what this type of venue, this type of Q&A should deliver. So I will point out he's doing great there. What they come up with, obviously we'll see if it accomplishes what he's talking about. I still feel like gear through UI is really bad, feels really terrible. Gear through vendor is only slightly less terrible. So yeah, I mean, there's probably better ways to deliver this gear that addresses the problem that people buy their weapon first. And so, yeah, it sounds like they're talking about it and trying to figure it out, which is good. There's some reason to be hopeful there. So, but we'll see.
Reward from a given week of conquest progression, you'll have a choice of, I believe, 4 distinct pieces for that slot.
Yeah.
And with the new 5-ring armor, you're basically going to see every possible trait that your class can have represented somewhere there. So if there's a specific trait you're chasing, you can get that for sure. Similarly, when it's a non-weapon or trinket week, when it's, let's say pants or gloves or boots, we will offer you a choice of 4 different items. Let's say 2 bracers and 2 pairs of pants with different stats on them and different slots. So if you happen to have a great pair of pants that you got from some other source or Lucky Warforge or whatever, don't get the pants, get the other slot instead. And if you're looking for a specific stat, get that stat. And then that's combined with the trophies that you can use to upgrade your gear to the appropriate rating. Every week of Conquest will also give you Quartermaster coins that give you a steady sense of progress towards earning those trophies. So ultimately, over the course of earning your Conquest points in a season, just as you could when there were vendors, you should be able to handpick the pieces that you want for given slots and have the ability to upgrade those in the long term to the appropriate item level for the rank that you're playing at. And so ultimately, is that better than a vendor, it's different than a vendor, right? There's certainly more control if there's just everything that's out there on a vendor and you can go buy it. One difference between...
But it sounds a little slot machine-y, right? Like you get a few choices, but eventually you get to the point where you're looking for a certain thing. You might start at that point, or you might get to that point towards the end of gearing up, but it's still at some point you're going to have... I guess it depends on the delivery system for the currency spent. Like if it's like the chests that are weekly, you could only spend so much per week, you know. But if you can dump it all the time, I don't know. So much of this stuff comes down to the details, right?
The way PvP gear works now and the way it did back in the day is that now it's actually competing with the rest of our reward systems. When we had PvP vendors, we had stats like resilience and PvP power on that armor, which made it irrelevant and clearly not the correct choice for a raider to use or for someone who's trying to do other types of content. Whereas now, it's all a single unified system. We think there's upsides there. It reduces the barriers to entry to PvP. If you want to get into PvP for the first time, you can take the gear that you've used from other parts of the game and just jump in and have fun as you learn the ropes.
Very
but
important.
One of the downsides to it is we do need to take the rest of the game into account in a fuller sense as we're designing the reward systems, because there isn't a raid vendor where you can just go buy all your raid loot. And we're trying to balance the desirability and attractiveness of those systems on the spectrum of rate of loot attainability and control.
Yeah, the comparison isn't really a good one because you have the ultimate experience in raids of getting loot, of looting corpses of these giant creatures that you've worked your butt off to kill, right? So that doesn't happen in a PvP setting, or at least they haven't come up with a way to do that, right? If they had that, they also wouldn't need PvP vendors, right? So it's a weird comparison to make, because no one expects to be able to just go and buy all the PvP gear without doing the things that it requires, right? You still have to spend a lot of time doing PvP, just like you would spend a lot of time doing raiding stuff in order to get the rewards. It's just the delivery mechanism is different because of the nature of the experience.
The PvP system actually probably offers by far the most control over getting the exact rewards that you want when you compare it to other endgame activities like Mythic Plus or endgame raiding.
Okay.
Yeah, most control, which also means it's actually not as interesting, right? And again, buying from a vendor is so much worse than looting it off of some awesome thing you just killed.
I've just been thinking back through all the different ways that PvP gearing has worked in the past, and I think the point you made about it all being sort of tied into the same general, like it rewards a rewards thing, is actually super important in a universe now. Like we've got world quests that you need to go out and do. Something like the dual eye level system that we had in Warlords would be really, really weird for that, because like sure, if someone attacks you, all of a sudden you gain like 80 item levels and you're way better, but yeah, so there are definitely downsides to the way the system has always had to work in the past. Hopefully we can get things to a point where everyone feels satisfied.
Yeah, and that's the goal. And I think, and if the question mentioned stats, if there are stats that are such outliers, especially in PvP, like if you feel like mastery is so incredibly dominant that any piece that doesn't have mastery is useless to you, and some of the conquest schedule rewards don't have mastery on them, that's a problem we can attack from two different angles. One, by looking at the rewards themselves, but on the other hand, regardless of the context, whether it's raiding or whether it's arena, there shouldn't be such large disparities in our stats where some stats are effectively dead and some are mandatory. And so that's a problem we can attack from the class balance angle as well.
Yeah, I guess a good question to pose in terms of feedback would be, what choices do you feel you don't have in the current system?
Exactly that.
So cool. That would be great to see. Moving on, question from Narillin on Twitter, who said, when are Mythic Plus seasons going to give rewards other than a hidden achievement? Pandaria and Warlords had some nice challenge mode rewards. BFA has nothing cool like that. So looking, obviously Mythic Plus gives rewards that are item level focused and upgrades.
Tons of great gear, right. So I think challenge mode in Mists and Warlords was exclusively a cosmetic system. You got nothing. You got no real items from it. I think this is a great question. This is something that we should talk about. I think when we first introduced the Mythic Plus system in Legion, it wasn't clear. It was an experiment for Legion. At this point, we feel it was a very successful experiment, and it's increasingly being enshrined as a new pillar of our endgame alongside raiding and rated PvP. And in that,
you guys feel that way? I've heard a lot of good things about Mythic Plus. But is it something they should be enshrining? Is it something they should be, evergreen from this point on?
in that sense, I think it makes sense to have some sort of, whether it's cosmetic rewards, titles, things that come out of it. Nothing specific to announce right now, but that's definitely a direction we should explore.
Okay. Cool. Moving right along. Next question from Brettel, who says, are there any plans on how to address the problem that some class mechanics are pretty much mandatory for high-level keystones, such as rogue shrouds? Why are there no crafting items that have the same effect, like with bloodlust drums? Can we get drums of concealment? I'm not sure what we would call those.
Yeah, we could probably come up with some consumable. But so I think we made a hotfix just yesterday or the day before to invisibility potions. So rather, the invisibility potions are the consumable that lets you do skips that you otherwise would require a shroud for. The downside to them, of course, is that it locks out your other potion cooldowns for some period of time. We lowered that from 10 minutes to 5 minutes, which significantly reduces the tax, in a sense, on a high-end group that's relying on chain potting throughout the dungeon if they don't have a rogue. Now,
again, Band-Aid. That is a classic Band-Aid for the problem that one class has a mechanic that is so heavily leaned on in order to accomplish some of the content, which is, in this specific case, a timer, which greatly advantages people that can skip content, right? So it's like, let's put a timer, okay? Now everyone needs to skip as much content as possible. Now that we have a class that allows, maximum skipping, right? Whoops. Oh, don't worry about it. We could just make invisibility potions be extra awesome. So now you don't even need the rogue, right? Really? Is that the end goal? Is that what we wanted? Was that the purpose of adding Shroud in the first place? I thought the purpose was to give the rogue this cool thing that he could bring to groups that excited people that he was in there. And then other classes would also have things, right? So to me, it's just a classic Band-Aid for a problem that starts with timers. There's only one way to do this, and that's speed, right? That's a problem to me.
We're not removing it entirely, and the reason why we're hesitant to expand this in terms of other consumables is we'd rather take the approach of finding other cool hooks for different classes that make them feel almost mandatory as well. Like, ideally, there should be 7 or 8 different mechanics that feel as potent as Shroud, that all feel quote-unquote mandatory, except you can only fit 3 or 4 of them in your group
Right.
as you're forming it. And so that would affect how you tackle a dungeon, what you feel like you can cheese, what you feel like you can't. And some of these are, not quite as universal as Shroud, but they exist. If you're doing, King's Rest with a Death Knight, for example, who can control undead and a lot of the undead there, to do things both like, to help manage CC, but also to control when you trigger the new Reaping affix, let's say.
Right, so that is the right approach, right? But again, it's like with the timer in place, all of them are going to have to be related to speed. This obsession with speed and clear times and speed running is, I think, a real issue with a lot of games these days, and with WoW, right? Like, there's got to be better ways, There's got to be more ways to make a dungeon play in an interesting way other than speed. Being careful and having no deaths, is another one, right? The completionist way, killing everything, should be another one. Like, I don't know. They should approach it from what do different kinds of ways do players want to defeat content?
Say, because you can let that mind control break at a time of your choosing to push yourself over the 20% threshold. That could be a perk that opens up routing that isn't possible for someone who doesn't have that class present. Maybe Death Knights aren't the best example given their tank dominance at the high end scene, but
Sure.
that's the sort of thing that we'd like to better approach.
And just to follow up that comment, it also makes making content that much harder because if your expectation is we're going to make X amount of content, but 30% of that content is going to consistently be skipped because of all these class mechanics, because the timer's in place and people have to go fast, then you're shortchanging all of the work that you're putting into these dungeons and these encounters and these groups so much, right? So it's also just a bad approach from a productivity standpoint.
Now, that said, and yes, congratulations on your that said bingo.
I had that thought immediately.
Sorry.
As well.
It's really nothing that will break you of mannerisms of speech like Twitch chat on the internet. So appreciate that.
Hasn't broken him
No,
yet,
it's true.
though.
Like
Sounds good. Makes sense.
super conscious. It's certainly possible for certain mechanics.
I'm really glad that he actually mentioned that. That's one of those things that actually endears you, right, to your audience, right, is that there's a rapport with you and the people that you've been talking to, right? That the message is received, that you're aware of what people are talking about, and that you don't mind poking a little fun at yourself, right? So I think that's actually really good.
To be too impactful, and some of that is a product of things like the enemy forces percent and overall routing in certain dungeons. If it feels like you're going to get to 115% enemy forces without skips, and you just, no matter what you do, and you need to use Shroud, you need to invis in order to have anything, it's shaving off multiple minutes of your run. That's something where we probably should also be looking at the enemy forces percent. And so getting a sense of which dungeons are the biggest outliers there, where you're going way over without large skips, would also be helpful feedback on that front. It's something we're keeping an eye on. So I think certainly there may be times where using a skip to pick some mobs over others, right, where you're skipping and now the mandatory mobs aren't going to get you to 100%, so you're going to go pull extra things.
Right.
But that's very different when it's your choice to do that versus you're just going to have to kill extra things if you don't skip.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of ties into something I was going to ask you about as well, being you mentioned invisibility potions as kind of the semi-substitute for rogue shrouds, but obviously you can still use both. But if the enemy forces is more of a factor, then using both doesn't really get you anything, because then it doesn't get you as much.
Exactly.
Anyway. It gives you more choice in which mobs you
in the
fight.
original design of Mythic Plus, enemy forces was almost there as a counter to all stealth group strats of Guardian Druid, Resto Druid, and Rogue Druid DPS that just skip everything. And ideally, it should be more closely calibrated to the number of mobs that you normally must kill if you're just trying to walk through without stealth or skips.
Right.
And where there's a significant disparity, we should address that.
Yeah, it's a really specific and interesting problem to solve, and one I've never had an answer to. What do you do with groups that can stealth, the whole thing? Because you have to allow for some skipping, right? Because that makes the classes that are stealthy feel really cool. And it works naturally in big dungeons like BRD, where you can do some fun things at the end of the day. But when, again, the timer is in there, it's just like, now you have all these artificial mechanics in the game that you don't really feel rewarded, because at the end of the day, there's this catch-all that makes sure that there's a safety net for the dungeon, so it's not cheapened. Imagine stealth wasn't in the game, and all of these, all this skippable content was just down side passages, and you could basically pick, based on your composition, which, groups you were going to take. that becomes an interesting strategy element to how are we going to, get all the kills we need to get through this dungeon, which can be a really interesting part to the game. If all the classes offer different things and your composition's good at one thing versus another, that becomes a cool strategy layer thing, right? But with skipping, and I haven't played Mythic Plus, so I don't know the depths of the strategy involved. People say that it's back, it's much more pronounced and it's much more interesting and compelling. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting problem.
Okay. Cool. Next question comes from Raging Wolf, who says, will there ever be a way to punish players that abandon keystone runs midway? It's frustrating when pugs frequently apply, then bail during the progression of the key, wanting a free carry. So I actually remember back very, very early Legion when it was changed, because it used to be that, right when Legion first came out, it used to be that if someone left a keystone run, they still got loot or something like that. Or they didn't. I don't remember exactly how it was, but there was some sort of change that was made that made it so that I remember what it was now. Actually, it was people who we were having a problem with, like someone disconnects on the last fight.
Welcome to the Q&A, where we take Josh down memory lane, where he travels through all of his deepest childhood memories to remember. It's a really fun thing, right? And it's a really, really compelling part of the Q&A that everyone wants to take part in. Dude, just stop, all right? Just stop.
In Legion or something, and then now they don't get anything for the entire run because they disconnected at some point. Even if they disconnected and reconnected, like, they still would miss out or something. So
yeah,
I remember there being a change.
There were a few early bugs, and then I think
even Ian just looks like he's like, dude, just shut up, man. Can we get back to the question?
I think there's loot protection to make sure that if you DC on the final boss fight, you don't get nothing, which is the same way raid bosses work and other aspects of the game. We want to make sure that if you earn the loot, you get the loot. So the underlying question here is challenging, right? I'm sure in some dystopian future MMO world where we're all playing with VR haptics, you can like give the person an electric shock, and then you can feel good about just punishing them.
Here's the dystopian future he's talking about. It's when Classic comes out this year, and people's reputation matters, and they get naturally punished in a social environment where you're not meeting random people that you play with and will never play with again. So that's the dystopian future, right, that I see. If only we could imagine this thing where, that's interesting.
But other than that, it's hard for us to punish people in a social situation, right? Punishment makes sense and works in random match-made situations, right? That's what Deserter is literally there for. If you join a dungeon group through LFG and you don't like the group and you're like, all right, I'm leaving, I'm going to bail on them and force them to wait and struggle, you're stuck with Deserter to try to disincentivize that behavior. Ultimately, Mythic Plus, just like pickup group raids and other non-match-made activities, there is a social contract there. And I recognize that when you're dealing with relatively anonymous people, that social contract is maybe weaker. And I think that's one of the strongest arguments, in MMOs in general for forming stronger social bonds, for making friends, for adding that tank to your friends list, for finding that good rogue or whatever that that you've played with before, had a good time, that isn't going to just bail on you.
He's not honestly suggesting that this is players. This is up to the players to fix. My God. The game has completely abandoned players to this current mess, right, in terms of social network. And now he has the stones to suggest, well, why don't you just add that tank to your friends list? Why don't you can solve this problem. You'll never see that guy again. You know nothing about him. And he doesn't even play on the server you play on, so there's probably going to be all kinds of problems with trading and talking, and it's just going to be a giant mess, right? but you have all the tools available. Come on. Instead of like, hey, why don't we actually make the game support social contracts, positive, repeatable experiences within the game itself. That hurts me. It hurts me deep.
Because the penalty for bailing on you is a social one. It's, well, they're not going to invite you to group anymore if you were just a jerk and you left. And us trying to objectively come up with a system here would likely run into other problems, because sometimes, sometimes there are runs that actually should be abandoned. If folks are in over their head and a group is trying to do, a high keystone that someone is very determined that they want to get done, but the group clearly isn't handling the mechanics and has wiped multiple times very early on in the dungeon, it's totally reasonable for someone to look at this and say, hey, I don't have 2 hours. Like, literally, I have to go do something. I don't have 2 hours to sit here and play through this whole dungeon and wipe 30 times. I'm going to leave. And it's hard to imagine us finding an objective way to punish that person for making that decision that doesn't also open tons of loopholes. And so, I think that's just where things stand when you have manually formed groups, and that's the social aspect of dungeons and raids when it comes to that.
And he's still operating within this trapped box that he feels he's in. Like, well, that's just the way it is. There's no way to improve the social network or social experience of the game. That part of this is over. Now we just have to figure out little band-aids that we can put on things or not, and just let them run their course, right? It's bad, like, yeah, someone needs to really think at a high level, what are their goals? What are the goals of this project now that it's at this state, in its lifetime? And are they committed to the pillars of what make an MMO amazing? Game, social, and world, sense of world. I almost forgot. I've said it 1,000,000 times on my stream.
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of people suggesting an idea of like a quote-unquote karma system, and there's even been, I think, a couple of add-ons and websites that have tried to do something like that, but they end up being very, very... They end up having a lot of the same problems that we've seen in the past with things like gear score, or even nowadays with IO scores, where people say, okay, your score isn't high enough, so therefore you can't come, which then in turn means that you don't get invited, and you can never fix it.
That's something that we talked about a lot that we'd like to explore, though. I think there's, in other, you see what Overwatch and other games
Hallelujah
do, the ability to just kind of give a thumbs up or a like or an upvote at the end of a run. It's like you said, it's easier said than done. There's something appealing about a way of being able to look at a player that you've never played with and know, okay, a lot of other people have highly recommended this person, right? It's the same way when you call an Uber or Lyft, you can see their star rating because tons of other drivers, or other passengers thought this driver was good. It gives you an added sense of trust. Doing that in a way that's not going to be manipulated and not going to lead to negative social outcomes, that's the challenge.
Yeah, and that's why, again, the social thing is so important, right? Because those things happen naturally. People have reps over time. Anytime where you're just bouncing strangers into each other constantly, yeah, those are just all those kind of systems that are going to try to inform you what this stranger is all about are doomed to failure and exploit. So once you've lost that sense of a social network that naturally builds a community where reputations again matter, right? But again, it's like he's operating from this idea that, well, that's the game. That's the game that we have now, where we're just constantly jamming strangers together all the time. Shake out of that. Figure out a way to get community back into this game.
But that's something we talk about a lot that we'd love to get done one day.
Cool. All right, let's move on. Question here from Wasselin, who says, the transmog in BFA leaves a lot to be desired. When are you bringing back class-specific sets? One set for each armor type is not enough.
So I think, obviously, this is taste is subjective when it comes to this. we're taking a break from the traditional class sets in BFA. That's not necessarily a permanent break. It's quite possible we'll go back to doing class sets in the future. I think we're doing it for a few reasons. It's not actually because Azerite Armor is replacing it. That could have worked with traditional class set art without a problem. It's actually more a conscious decision to add more variety. The key thing is we don't just have one class-specific set. So at times in the past in WoW, we would make 12 sets, one for each class, or however many classes we had at the time.
Right.
There'd be a variant, perhaps a color variant a lot of the time for PvP, and then maybe more recently the Mythic version would have some extra visual effects and geometry attached to it. But almost all of the gear from all of these sources shared the same look. And that actually led to a certain monotony there. Similarly, and also we were going down the road of having our artists take their 21st or 22nd or 23rd crack at what is the priest fantasy, what is the mage fantasy, which also often came at the expense of feeling connected to the place where that gear came from. So one of the reasons why we tried in the past doing armor that felt themed to a certain place, but how do you make the mage set that comes from a demon raid that doesn't feel like a warlock set? Because if it's if it feels all arcane and fire and frost, then that's not demonic or fel. And if it feels fel, then it's a fel caster set that looks warlock. So instead, we have a variety of different sets. Right? If you look at the PvP armor, if you look at what comes from Warfronts, if you look at what comes from Uldir versus Battle of Dazar lore, those are all meaningfully distinct sets that feel like they're connected to where they came from and actually are offering a wider variety of transmog options. And if you recall back in Legion, Emerald Nightmare gear, those were recolors of Nighthold gear. There weren't two separate gear sets and looks for Emerald Nightmare versus Nighthold, whereas Uldir and Battle of Dazar lore have completely different art. And so that's what we're trying to chase now. We're actually trying to offer more variety in transmog options. Rather than the 20-second take on what a cool Warlock set might be, let's give you a cool cloth voodoo-themed set, and one that's more Titan-themed, and one that's deeply themed after your faction, and one that is, Naga, coral-encrusted, jeweled, coming from Rise of Ashara next tier. There are more directions we can explore there.
Those sound like great thematics that they could tweak a little bit across the board with the class in mind, right? Doesn't it? I can understand one artist burning out on the 20-second approach to what is the priest fantasy. But they have a team of artists. Couldn't they rotate through and then as a group review them, right? They've had multiple art directors across the span of this thing. Each one should be bringing his own ideas. I'm just not buying this argument. I can see the logic, that he's following, the logic path that he's following down here. And some of the arguments behind that logic are solid, but I'm not buying some of the premise, that the artists are burnt out, essentially. The artists just don't want to make class sets anymore, right? There's got to be artists at Blizzard that are starving to put their take on class sets, right? Their creative imagination to work on what a variety of Titan-themed class sets would look like, and the community is telling them also at the same time they miss class sets quite a bit, and so they're not responding the way that he thinks they're responding, in terms of like if people were truly feeling homogenous, right, because they were all wearing class sets, and they're sick of looking like everyone else all the time, then they probably wouldn't have missed class sets. They'd have been like, oh sweet, now I can mix and match and choose all kinds of cool things, right? That's not the response a lot of people are having. I think the response a lot of people are having are, where are our class sets, right? And so they should be aware. And I've heard him run down this list of reasons a few times now in different forums. But again, the feedback keeps coming in, right? So he should become aware that despite all of those things that he's saying, people are still responding. We want our class sets, right? So yeah, it seems weird. Yeah, sorry about the microphone. My arm keeps dipping here. The microphone arm. Fix it. This is where I get a boo, from people that are, when Ian's watching this later, he can stream how bad my sound setup is. Get me right back. Yeah, so it seems like people still want class sets, and they want to feel like they're a class, and they want to look like their class, and they want it to be a recognizable thing that they are a badass version wearing the best gear for their class, right? And I think that's a really important thing that I'm not surprised to hear that people miss. So,
are we going to stay there forever? Definitely not saying we are. So I think it's quite possible we go back to class sets, but that's the logic for why it works the way it does in BFA.
Okay, so it's just let's just try something new for a little while. Khadgar head in a bubble.
And I mean, new, but I think hopefully better. This is an example of change for the sake of change. It's actually wanting to offer more meaningful variety than just giving arena rewards a recolor of the.
Yeah, it's not just change for the sake of change, which is like what we usually do. It's we thought through this one. We actually have logical arguments. It's kind of cool. We're excited about it. Yeah. We're excited about this weird approach.
Raid rewards or having all raid loot look the same, etc.
Okay. You mentioned Rise of Azhar just a second ago, which leads us into this question pretty well. Galcresh asked, can we get more information about the direction you're taking the Heart of Azeroth and the systems that will be in place for 8.2 and beyond? So just before the holiday break, we had a Q&A. You talked a little bit about some changes to the Heart of Azeroth that we're planning for the Rise of Azhar update. Is there anything more that we can share about that at this point?
A bit more. So I think I don't want to get too much into the details because a lot of the design is still under iteration, in very active discussion, and we're figuring out the details of it. But big picture, we want to move away from unlocking the same sets of traits on new pieces of armor as you get them. So in Rise of Azhar and beyond, you'll still have your 3 Azerite armor pieces. They'll still have the 5 rings that they have today, except the heart requirements for those pieces will not continue to increase. So when you get a new helm from the Azhar raid, it'll just have all the traits selectable. You can mix and match to your liking. It's and we'll have new traits that are specific to the new zones, and that will continue as it has been. Instead, what you'll earn by continuing to level up your Heart of Azeroth is something a bit more akin to how Legion artifacts work, where the amulet itself has powers that can be unlocked, customized, and chosen among. One of the things that we liked about the way the Legion artifacts work was actually the appearances that you could unlock by doing different types of content. We're looking at tying some of the heart powers that you can earn for the heart permanently into different types of content and rewards. Maybe there's one that you get from raiding and defeating Azhar, one that you get from emissaries, one that you get from PvP, one that you get from reputations, one that you get from Mythic Plus, and so on and so forth. As you earn these different powers, you can activate them, upgrade them, and these would include active abilities in many cases, so that you can actually imagine holding your Heart of Azeroth out and firing a beam of Azerite energy at an enemy, or shielding your group with an Azerite bubble, like things that are more reminiscent of the fantasy of the Legion artifact weapons, and actually
you heard it here first, group bubble hearth,
add to gameplay rather than just being passive modifications. So that's big picture what we're looking at. And again, the philosophy behind this is, I think I mentioned this a bit in the last Q&A, one of our big criticisms of how the Azerite system has worked out thus far is this inherent tension of artifact power and the type of system and the progression feels best when you're working towards an exciting goal. However, because we're using items as our delivery vehicle for those traits, it would feel pretty crappy to have the strongest Azerite power be the things at the center of the wheel that you couldn't use initially, because then that would undermine the feeling of getting a new reward. When you go into a raid and you kill a new boss, you get a pair of shoulders. Cool, if I put this on, I'm going to lose all of my best stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep it in my bags for a few more weeks until I can unlock it. That led us to put the class modifying, gameplay modifying abilities on the outer ring, so you have them right away. But then that undermines the feeling of artifact power feeling like an interesting progression or meaningful reward. So we're getting away from that, and you'll work towards permanent unlocks and just carrying your character forward through this parallel system that will complement Azerite as it currently stands.
Perfect, right? Community addressed or raised these specific concerns. We got them a lot. These are things we agree are cons. Now we're going to work to, remove them from future designs, right? On point, specific, good, right? Do that more often.
Awesome. I'm super excited to learn more about that once it's more further along in development.
Yep.
But I'm swamped talking to server programmers about how we're going to fix this whole 40v40 problem. He is just swamped. He's in all the meetings. It's crazy. You guys put too much pressure on this guy.
That sounds really exciting. Moving on, next question from Azamane, who says, are there any plans to further curb Titan residuum funneling? Still fairly easy for organized guilds to run single armor type raids and stockpile tons of residuum for next season. So basically talking about we're gonna run a raid where everybody wears plate, and all of the plate wearing people in the raid, then any Azerite pieces they get, they trade them over to this person. That person can then turn them into Titan residuum.
So you guys implemented a system, and it took 5 seconds for the community to embarrass you by coming up with a workaround. And what are you gonna do now?
Yeah, I think fairly easy is probably a relative term. I think fairly easy for world top 10 guilds
people,
who have streamers with hundreds of Twitch followers. Yes, they can probably fill their raids and do this a bit more easily. So we made a change last week, I believe, to make it so that you can't disenchant or scrap the wrong material type. Like if you're a hunter, you shouldn't have cloth Azure.
Hundreds of followers. Hundreds. I'm looking at you, Asmongold method. Hundreds.
Right? There's no reason why you'd ever have this in your possession other than someone giving it to you specifically to funnel. So that shouldn't give residuum. That throws up an extra barrier there. Beyond,
do you think that was a shot? Do you guys think that he was like, yeah, you guys are adorable, you have hundreds of subscribers, right? We have 1.5 million subscribers. We don't advertise it because we're too cool for that. But we have 1.5 million subscribers.
Beyond that, we don't want to make changes.
I pulled that number out of my ass, by the way.
That are going to hurt the majority of players and innocent gameplay for the sake of a tiny minority of the very high-end raiders that are doing this. What we do try to do is to curb the advantage that high-end extreme behavior can produce. Like, we understand very top guilds that are trying to push for world firsts, realm, region firsts, Hall of Fame. They will go to extreme lengths, and they've always done this to prepare and to compete, and they're going to put in a lot of time. And so I don't think there's anything that we could do that would make Method not spend 40-50 hours a week in the weeks leading up to a new tier to prepare their characters. They're just going to do what they think is the most efficient use of their time. If we completely remove this, they would spend that time leveling and gearing more alts for class stacking so that they can bring 5 rogues to one fight and 5 warlocks to another and 5 hunters to another. And that would still seem like an advantage over other guilds. Maybe not something that they consider necessarily fun, but it's in pursuit of a competitive goal that they do consider fun and worthwhile to pursue. What we've tried to do, though, is to reduce the gap in power between people who do those extreme behaviors and the more mainstream groups that are just playing the game, gearing up, focusing on their mains, and doing things more naturally.
Yeah.
And all of this, and I think that's what the residuum inflation from tier to tier actually helps do. We basically went up 10. We went up 10x in terms of the costs from season 1 to season 2 and the rewards. So when people open their,
so talk about the philosophy there real quick. Yeah, so, I would advocate a philosophy, obviously, that that addresses a problem for the natural playthrough, right? If the natural play, so I agree with him on that. He's trying to create a problem that addresses, or he's trying to come up with a solution that addresses a problem for the natural groups doing this kind of content, right? And he doesn't care that the high end get to exploit it just as well as they could before, right? Whereas I would approach a solution that affects the high end but doesn't destroy or damage the integrity of the natural playthrough, right? Sorry, he's trying to create a problem. So yeah, it seems like the goals are a little off here, right? Like, because if, like, how do you guys feel, right? How do you guys feel when the game puts a solution in place that totally shuts down your ability to do a thing that was giving you an advantage or an edge, or even just providing content for you to finish or continue doing because you were sick of, or you had no more content to do, but there's a group of people above you that can continue doing it and exploiting it because they have some other advantage, right? Does that feel good? No, it doesn't. It feels terrible. It feels like you're only punishing, like, the middle class, right? Which is something that I think everyone, just about everyone in the world is feeling right now, right? Like, if you're blessed to be in the middle class, right? Like, I don't know. It's funny because it's like, oh yeah, we don't care. They're going to do it anyway. They have their own special rules, so we're just going to let them get away with it. What can we do? But you guys, we got our eyes on you guys. Yeah, don't be trying to be like them. We're going to shut you down. Yeah, that feels awful, right? So if the solution only punishes the natural playthrough people, the natural play experience, that's the wrong solution. I'm sorry. Pretty bad. So yeah, rethink it. That philosophy, I think, is flawed.
Weekly Mythic Chest next Tuesday, next Wednesday if you're in Europe, Thursday if you're in Asia. You'll get, if you did a 10 or higher, you're going to see 625, 650 or more residuum. That would have been multiple weeks worth of residuum in season 1. And so if all of this funneling really just adds up to a 1 or 2 week head start in the season, which gives you one extra piece of gear, yes, that's an advantage. That's an advantage that's very quickly going to fade away and actually pales in comparison to what traditional split rating was doing for guilds in past tiers.
Oh, yeah.
Where you'd literally be able to funnel, 5 or 6
all
weeks
of
worth of heroic raid loot into one player, and that advantage would take months in some cases for regular guilds to overcome. So, anyway, TLDR, nothing further planned. This is something that's only being done by a tiny sliver of the player base, and we don't want to hurt average players just to curb this behavior when top guilds are just going to find some other outlet if we do.
Okay.
All right, so he just said there that they don't want to hurt. So we'll see if, they revert that, or have they already reverted it? I don't know. Anyway, here's the other issue too: is it's totally contradictory to some of the philosophy that they've had. What seems like they've had in the past, which is, let's jam everyone to the top, get everyone on equal footing, and allow them all to do the same content, right? Let's jam them all together. And so any solution that's like, well, let's not jam them too far to the front, let's leave that for a special elite group, and then everyone else can fight over the scraps, like, feels really like I don't know, counter to their own philosophy they seem to be running. So, yeah, we'll see.
Let's move on then. Next question comes from Jito, who says, what do you consider the biggest design challenges that WoW is facing in the long term from a development point of view? So,
that was perfect timing for this particular question. Wow, that's a good one. I love it. Well done, Micro. Well done.
We've got a very, very top-level view sort of question here.
I could talk for a really long time about this. To be fair, I can talk for a really long time about anything. But anyway,
I'm glad you said it.
Yeah, you're all thinking it. So it's a lot of dichotomies, a lot of just contradictions and tensions between opposing considerations. It's resolving short-term versus long-term, resolving casual versus hardcore, resolving, elegance and accessibility versus depth and complexity. I think WoW's a game that has so many different audiences and then subdivisions within those audiences. There's a ton of different play styles. Like, I think you could take a dozen people who all play WoW a lot and love WoW and sit them around a table and have them talk to each other about their experiences, and it would almost seem like they were each describing a different game.
Wow. Mark your calendars. He realizes. Oh, this is mind-blowing, right? This is mind-blowing. He's like, for the longest time, I don't know, for 10 years, I've been thinking all WoW players were just different, worse versions of me. I thought they were just scrubs that all thought the same way about the game that I do. That's really interesting. Well, at least he's here now. Welcome. Welcome to 2004.
Right? Whether you are somebody who is an altaholic versus a collector versus someone who just loves queuing up for BGs and pew-pewing on your hunter versus someone who doesn't see any point to the game other than pushing for Gladiator every season and everything else is in service of that goal versus the Raider versus and so on and so on and so forth. I think part of the magic of WoW is that it's a tapestry that combines all of these play styles and all these groups. I think the game is richer for...
No, it doesn't. No. I'm gonna call BS on this one. It does not cater. That tapestry, whew. There's some poop on that tapestry. It's covering up a lot of those different groups. And it used to be that, but yeah. That's what it should be again. And that should be your short-term and your long-term goal, is to get it back to that point.
For having all of them in it than it would be if we just picked one audience to cater to. It would be much easier to pick one audience to cater to.
Yeah.
Okay. It would be easier to do the thing we've been doing.
Totally.
And we could solve a lot of their problems. And if we're,
Cool.
If a lot of the time when players express frustration or disappointment at decisions we're making, they're like, "Why? If this just seems so simple, why don't you change the game in this way? It'll make us happy." It's not that we don't want to make you happy. It's that there's 10 other groups that have different competing concerns that would be hurt by that. And so play styles are one factor. I mean, touching on questions that we've talked about earlier on in this Q&A, things like catch-up, things like inflation.
Has he ever said this before in any forum? Like, I only recently have been watching Ian talk. I'm on my second, and maybe BlizzCon plus 2 Q&As. Has Ian ever talked like this before? Is this honestly the first time that he's said these words in this order? Talking about, because this is moment one, right? this is moment one of understanding what an MMO is and what it requires to be a successful and amazing MMO, right? So if he's only saying these things now, consider this the start of potentially a good new direction. But I have trouble giving him credit for having thought this way for 10 years, right? But you guys could maybe correct me.
From tier to tier, this is something that's been a problem in WoW for a long, long time. Yes, back in 2005, we didn't have these robust catch-up mechanisms, and I remember leading a raid guild in Burning Crusade and having one of
I trust your errant data. Yeah, proceed.
Our top raiders from Classic come back when we were pretty deep into Black Temple, who wanted to get into raiding, and it was like, all right, time to start. Like, we run Serpent Shrine and Tempest Keep for this guy again, and get them geared up. And yes, on the one hand, that made that gear feel more meaningful. On the other hand, it was this huge barrier to returning players and accessibility. And how would people feel? Yes, we worry about undermining your current accomplishments, but when Rise of Ashara comes out and someone is like, all right, I haven't played BFA in a few months, but I can't wait to go check this new thing out that's awesome, or I want to go rejoin my guild and play with them, if they actually have to play for 2 or 3 months doing old content that feels irrelevant to the current player base because, it's yesterday's news just to get caught up, maybe that person doesn't have a good time at all. Maybe that person feels like they can't rejoin your guild. All of those things are conflicting challenges. And there's countless more examples. I think those are the biggest design challenges facing WoW in the long term, because a lot of them are unique to WoW.
Here's the thing. If that content were fun, since your buddies that are playing don't have crap to do in the game that's fun for them, they'd probably be happy to join you with a lower level alt, or even some kind of system that allows them to join you in a fun and natural way to experience older content, right? Hey, but yeah, it's got to be fun, right? Game's got to be fun.
There isn't an analogous game that we can look to. It's like, all right, this is how they've managed 15 years of history and continuing to keep things elegant and accessible while also satisfying those who've been playing.
Oh, this offends me right here. If only they had a game they could look at that managed these things well. Huh. Does anyone have an idea? Does anyone have an idea what game that might be? Anyone? Bueller? Does anyone? No? Yeah, I'm stumped. I'm stumped myself.
Playing it for 15 years and want something new and exciting and additional depth. We certainly don't do a perfect job. I will never for a second admit that we are, but that's what we grapple with. They're fun questions, but they're hard questions, and we're doing a lot of thinking and internal discussion about that going forward. I think there have been a lot of good points raised in the community. It's very easy for us to err in going too far in one direction versus the other, whether that's accessibility, whether it's gear catch up, whether it's the importance of gear and the investment you have in the items that you're wearing, or whatever else. I think on class design, for example, I think for a while we had it as, for many years actually, I think we had it as a sort of an internal, just almost a truism that we had agreed upon as a design team, that our classes they didn't need more added to them, that if we added anything, we needed to remove something. And this is a Blizzard philosophy that you've seen in a lot of other places. When StarCraft made their expansions, when even like StarCraft 1 or StarCraft 2, they didn't just strictly add a whole bunch of new units. The design team took the approach of, okay, for everything we add, we're going to remove something, because we're trying to manage the overall scope and complexity and accessibility of this system. That may be a good principle for making a brand new standalone game, but we maybe are underserving folks who have played a class for a dozen years and really just want something new. Even if it does make it a bit unwieldy, maybe we should be giving that to them. And so these questions are still open. Just because we've done something for a few years and taken a certain path doesn't mean that we're always going to take that path. We constantly are reevaluating, reexamining the decisions we're making, and making sure they're the best thing for our player base as a whole, and really for the dozen different player bases we effectively have and are trying to all balance against each other.
And I actually think what you were talking about earlier about the Heart of Azeroth stuff that we're considering for Rise of Ajara is actually a really good example of what you were just talking about. The idea of, we had the artifact in Legion that was taken away with Battle for Azeroth, but now we're looking back at that system and going, actually, maybe we should keep some of that. Maybe we should bring some of that back into the back.
No, Josh, you're undoing what he just said. You're undoing what Ian just said that has people excited. Yeah, maybe we should, appreciate that people have played a class for 12 years and maybe want something new. What do you think, Josh? Well, I think we should bring back the Legion artifact stuff. Yeah, pretty good.
In the mix. So that's really super interesting. I would actually love to hear you talk about that for a million years, but we've got a bunch more questions, and a few of them I'd really like to get to.
Okay.
This one comes from Scar Totem on Twitter, who said, what conversations have been held about the GCD change?
By the way, B-Spy, you win all the goodies because you put classic, you're an S-fan sub, and you responded with the correct emote. Well done, sir. Well done.
And are you generally happy with how it's played out? I know that the GCD has been an ongoing thing throughout all of Battle for Azeroth so far, and we've brought a lot of stuff back off the GCD, made some changes to things.
Happy is a strong word. I mean, I think we definitely feel like we went too far, which is why we've been reining it in over the course of both the later stages of the beta and more recently with a lot of the movement abilities. We think that we're not done. We think that having the GCD, the global cooldown, being closer to global and having most abilities obey it is a better place overall for the pace of the game to be in terms of minimizing macros, in terms of managing the decision-making that you're making in the moment-to-moment gameplay. Now, just putting a bunch of things back on the GCD, we've realized a lot of those buttons feel unsatisfying to press. That includes a lot of the offensive cooldowns. So some work in internal discussion that we're doing right now is trying to solve those problems more surgically on an individual basis. And an example of a change that I think is likely coming in 8.1.5 that should be in a future PTR build is like take Shaman Ascendance as an ability. Right now, you just push that, it's a GCD, you transform, that's kind of cool, but you're basically doing nothing. It's purely a modal shift. And especially as a healer, you may feel like you're actually now behind on the emergency situation you were trying to respond to in a way that can be frustrating. Well, what if we added an active component to that so that when you turn into an Ascendant, you emitted a wave of healing water around you, doing this big burst AoE splash heal as you transformed, and then you were an Ascendant for the next 15 seconds with the bonuses that entails. Like, what if we start to take that approach and apply it to more other abilities? That sort of thing can make those buttons, while on the GCD, feel more satisfying to press while on the GCD. Because I think the answer to this button feels bad to press isn't, I don't think, okay, just take it off the GCD so you can just press it and you don't even feel pressing it. You're just almost combining it with another action. It's, let's look at why it doesn't feel satisfying to press and fix that.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
Sorry,
Cool.
I've been thinking about a lot of what you were saying.
Sorry, I was just staring into those dreamy eyes. That's why I say, okay, cool, after you talk, because I really just can't focus. The way you stare at me instead of the camera just really unsettles me.
Saying just there, as we've been going through this and actually looking through a couple of the questions we've got coming up, we actually have a few things about class questions. I'm just going to actually move on to this next one because I think it's really interesting and maybe part of the general philosophy here comes from, it's actually another one from Wasselin, who said, as a healer main, I find myself feeling forced into a DPS spec more and more, even in group content such as Islands and Warfronts. Are you trying to get away from the Holy Trinity design, and can healers get higher DPS in PvE?
I'm curious about the answer to this because, they've put in a lot of mechanics, class mechanics, and game systems that resemble Diablo's, right? And as you move towards a Diablo game, Diablo doesn't have the Holy Trinity, right? In their character design, everyone is basically just flavors of DPS. So my first thought is this sort of a consequence of an unintended consequence of doing so many, Diablo style changes with combat speeds and things like that.
So I think we are the Holy Trinity design, referring to the tank, healer, DPS, core dungeon gameplay that goes all the way back to EverQuest and beyond. We're not trying to get away from it broadly. I think we're definitely trying to experiment with different types of gameplay. Outdoor world gameplay traditionally has never really gravitated around this, and scenarios, islands don't. Our goal is to have there be advantages to being able to play your role in each of these situations. If you are a healer on an island, that should mean that your group mates can pull much more aggressively, and that you have some advantages when you're matching up against the enemy AI, because you can be a bit more reckless, you have much more sustainability, you should feel like you're contributing in that role. Now, is a 3 healer group going to do great on an island? Probably not, but that's also relatively unlikely. If you feel like being a healer in Warfronts is irrelevant, then that probably speaks more to the amount of damage that's going out in Warfronts and just the level of challenge that's being posed. Yes, if no one's health bar is moving down, then it doesn't make sense to be a healer. Healer DPS, I think it's much higher than it used to be years and years past. I think there's a point where once you cross a threshold compared to a regular damage dealer, especially because healer DPS rotations are very simple, like damage dealing rotation.
Did you guys know that if you one-shot things, that nothing really matters? Did you guys know that?
Often involve multiple abilities reacting to procs, and you have to play them perfectly. Healer DPS rotations are usually just a couple of buttons because primarily you're a healer. So if the very low skill ceiling healer rotation is actually 80% of someone who's a mediocre DPS player,
right?
Now that actually undermines the role of DPS in the game, because the healer is also has all this awesome sustainability and utility, and so there's a certain line we're not happy to cross. Personally, I do most of my world quests as a healer, and it's a little bit slower than being DPS, but with war mode on, there's also a lot of value in feeling like I have much more sustainability if I run into a solo PvP encounter.
Did he just admit to be Alliance?
So there's a balance there. I think some specs maybe could use some more help, but
he's getting a 30% warn. Or core bonus.
If we push the line too far, you end up with where Disc Priests were at the start of the expansion, where it felt
Right.
like they were just unkillable gods, and Shadow Priests were switching to Disc, even if they didn't normally heal, just because that felt like the right way to DPS.
Isn't that the
That's the
discipline
concern.
class fantasy, though, being an unkillable god? That's kind of...
Sure. That's everyone's class fantasy, really.
True, yeah.
That's every protagonist's fantasy. And you're all protagonists. You're all winners.
All right. Question here from JFunk Gaming on Twitter asking, are there any major class changes in the works for 815? We've talked about a couple of, what we would call more minor changes, like the Ascendance sort of thing you were talking about. Are we planning any, huge, massive things for 815?
No major overhauls, no. Focused, looking at talent balance, looking at specific abilities that could use some love, that sort of thing. Pure balance is likely to happen just via hotfix. I think we're looking at data coming in from the first week of the new raid and that other content. I think Arms Warriors there in particular could definitely use some love. That's one that I know the team has discussed a lot. I'm not sure exactly what else is in the pipeline off the top of my head. But yeah, so I think in Legion, 7.1.5 ended up being the patch with a ton of major changes. That's because 7.1 came so soon on the heels of Legion that was actually pretty much in the can by the time Legion had come out. There wasn't time to make class changes responding to what we were seeing in the live game. Whereas 8.1, coming 5 or so weeks later in the cycle, actually gave us that time. And so there were some significant changes that made it into that patch. I think Feral Druids and their ability to AoE and to hold their own much more in dungeons, I think, are an example of the sort of change we're talking about there. Several of the, there are a couple of examples where
Arms Warriors.
Feedback that we get gets more to the heart of a class's or a spec's resource system or the fundamental nature of the rotation. Those types of changes are likely going to have to wait until the next expansion. Those aren't the sorts of changes we generally make out from under you in a patch, just because, again, that's looking at the wide variety of audiences. For the average player logging into a new patch and finding that your entire resource system has changed, or that multiple buttons that you were accustomed to pressing no longer exist or have different names, that goes beyond what really should be expected ever in a patch.
And could be argued that's true for expansions as well. Not always.
Okay. Yeah, and one thing that I want to make sure that we point out as we're talking about this question here too is the term major class changes means a different thing to totally. Absolutely everybody. I think a while back.
In other words, that was a terrible question. Why did you ask it, and why did we choose to answer this one when it was so vague and open-ended? Oh, because then we can just answer it however we want, because it's not very specific.
In a Q&A prior to the launch of BFA, we were talking about, okay, there's not going to be any major class changes for Shaman as an example until we were at that time looking at 8.1. And then in our minds, as we had been discussing, the major changes were like, okay, we need to buff and debuff and change how abilities damage flow works and everything.
Yeah.
Which we ended up doing a bunch of, but it's clear from what we said at the time that a lot of Shaman players were expecting a complete overhaul of their spec in that patch, and so that was a bit of a miscommunication there. So that's just why I wanted to make that point here.
Yeah, and I would say,
and it happens the other way around too sometimes, where we say, no major class changes planned for 8.1.5, and then something like the Ascendance change you were just talking about goes in, and then people go, "What? You said there were no major changes. This is huge."
When we say major, I think we mean rotational overhauls, resource overhauls. Things like adding Maelstrom, removing Holy Power from a spec. Like, that's not something that's going to happen in a patch.
Right.
That it's both because of the magnitude of the change in terms of player expectation, but also the amount of time to test those changes and get feedback on them exceeds what any patch PTR cycle would ever give us. That's more the kind of thing for an expansion beta.
Right. So not going to completely change your spec to feel like something different entirely, but there is still some balance stuff, and the balance has been ongoing through hotfixes as well.
Yep.
All right, I think we have pretty much run out of time, so that's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much, Ian, for coming on here and answering these questions.
Pleasure as always.
It's been fantastic, and hopefully we've gotten some really good information out there for you guys as well. We do have more Q&As obviously being planned at this point in time.
Yep.
Trying to keep that content coming as quickly as possible, so keep an eye out for more announcements in the very near future. What's going to be happening. We're also going to be looking into doing more of the sort of like dev chat style things, like what we did with Taryn and Steve a couple of weeks ago. So I actually personally I would love to hear what sort of aspects of the development team that you're not hearing from on these Q&As that you'd like to hear more from. Like you were talking about engineers earlier with stuff like server latency. I personally think it'd be really interesting to learn from those guys what it is that they do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm up here trying to get out as much information as I can on a regular basis, but there's a giant team of nearly 300 folks who have all these awesome areas of expertise that I couldn't begin to speak to that we'd love to be able to share with you.
People.
Awesome. So yeah, let me know.
Let's hear from those artists about class sets, how they're burnt out. Yeah, let's talk that.
What sort of topics you'd like to see covered there, let us know. In the meantime, thanks again, everybody, for hanging out.
Looking forward to the world first race next week in Mythic. That's going to be a fun time in Ballads of Lore. We'll see who takes home the crown.
I'm pretty sure you just finished someone's bingo, actually. Pretty sure you just finished someone's bingo. There you go. Thanks for hanging out, everybody.
Purely coincidental. I had no idea there was even a bingo.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Later, guys.
See ya.
All right. So I asked the question at the beginning. Let's see how they do in answering questions, the types of questions they tackle. They did a lot better, I'll be honest. They did a lot better at picking questions that players care about and are, basically things that the internet would say the game is on fire, right? They did some fluff ones, obviously, too. Some softballs. They started with some softballs, but I will give them credit for tackling some of those tougher things. And some of their answers honestly inspire me with some hope that they're having conversations with the right approach to, the philosophy of the direction they want to go, and they were able to convey some of the pros and cons, and again talk about the pros that people seem to really want in future systems, and remove some of the cons that people don't want. So there is hope, I think, to be gained from it. But I'd also have to say, like, it feels real bad that some of these philosophies seem like it's only occurring to them now, right? Like, this is day one of how would we make an MMO, right? Like, that's disheartening, and it makes me sad, because this is stuff that we talked about 15 plus years ago, right? And had a pretty good grasp on, so for them to just kind of be vocalizing it now for the first time in some cases, or what seems like the first time in some cases, is, it's disheartening. But I've talked many times on my stream about this being a crossroads for WoW in general. I think the message has gotten louder and louder about dissatisfaction with the state of the game. Classic is coming out. People are super excited. That message is growing. Obviously, Classic coming out and how successful that is going to be another huge part of the message. And then how they take that message and what they do with that message, and all of the messaging they've been getting from the community is going to decide sort of what path they take down this crossroads. And it's going to be really, really interesting future for WoW, I think, next couple of years. So I think there's some stuff to be hopeful about. There's some stuff that you have to wonder, like, if they're only figuring out some of these philosophies now, are they going to be able to navigate again all of those little questions that come up that we had to, deal with back in the day in a way that creates a game that's truly spectacular? Or are they going to stumble on those questions like they've been stumbling, for the last several years, it seems, with the last few expansions? I don't know. I can't say, but we'll see. So anyway, thanks for checking it out. Hope you guys all appreciated it. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and come follow me on Twitch. I'll see you soon.